This is the Aware Families Podcast, the show that brings you a science-based, practical look at how to use the principles of functional medicine to keep your family healthy. Welcome back to episode 3 of the Aware Families Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Flass.
And I'm Brittany Coburn.
Yeah, so just to review, we are kind of going through these podcasts. We're going through what we call the 6 pillars of health. So nutrition is number 1. Today we're going to talk about sleep, which is number 2. And then in future episodes, we'll talk about exercise and activity. We'll talk about stress and mental health. We'll talk about connection and community. And we'll talk about nature and environment, all as fundamental components of your health. But today, again, we're going to talk about sleep.
Yes, and why sleep is so important, because we do know that sleep actually does so many different things for the body, and maybe is one of the most underrated treatments that you can do.
Yes, if you're cheating your sleep, a lot of other stuff starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that today.
Right, yeah. So why is sleep so important? What would you say some of the number 1 points that you would make to people if you were talking to them about why sleep is important?
I mean, the brain stuff, I think, is paramount, right? That's when your memories get consolidated. So, if you are either insufficiently slept or have things like sleep apnea, other things like that, your memory starts to go. And basically people, if you're a school-age kid or, somebody who's in college or whatever, you're just not going to do as well academically. Your brain is not going to work as well.
Yep. You don't remember things as well. Your recall is decreased, right? So you aren't solidifying any of the things that you really tried to learn the day before or were studying if you're a kiddo. I also talk about who does not charge their phone at night, right? Everybody charges their phone at night. This is how we charge our brain.
Yep.
We sleep.
And the whole thing with those important little parts of our cells called the mitochondria, which really are in a lot of ways running the show.
Powerhouse.
And if you don't allow them time for rest and repair and regeneration, then again things start to kind of fall apart, and chronic fatigue and energy, and your brain doesn't work as well. And there's these processes where they sort of take out the trash. There's something called mitophagy and autophagy, where these parts, either your cells overall or these little energy powerhouses, kind of repair and recycle, and that's largely during sleep.
Right.
And if you're not having good sleep, then that does not allow that time for rest and repair.
Right. And it probably is a contributing factor to when we struggle with certain things with autoimmune disease. Sleep impacts those functions just tremendously. So when you're not getting sleep and it's consistent, I think symptoms that we have or are expressing are bigger, larger, right? Which is all part of that, mitochondrial piece.
And then one of the scariest things now with this kind of, I don't want to say epidemic, but the really rising rates of neurodegenerative disease, so Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and there's a big link in there. And again, it's a time when your brain takes out the trash, so to speak.
Yep, cleans up, repairs.
So things like the tau and the amyloid, these proteins that can build up, and we know that build up in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's, that is the time, that deep sleep and REM sleep are the times when your brain takes out that trash and gets rid of this kind of gunk that's in there. And so chronically underslept people do not have that sort of cleaning house time, and it can really profoundly affect the brain on a big picture scale. Right.
It's impacting, body-wide, your strength. You don't feel like you're able to do as much physically during the next day, think as clearly, like you're just saying. I think every system is impacted by a lack of sleep. Hormones are huge. You think of kiddos in school, right? And what happens about 10 o'clock, and obviously their diet is a piece too, but kiddos that haven't slept well or are up until midnight, they get real hyper. Real dysregulation. That is the perfect term for this. The lack of sleep causes dysregulation in pediatrics, adolescents, older adults, every single one of us.
Yeah, so when you look at the list of things that are impacted, it's basically everything, but brain-wise, mental health disorders, huge link with depression, anxiety. ADHD, and poor sleep or sleep disorders, the cognitive decline in Alzheimer's, memory issues, school performance. Then there's the metabolic piece.
I was just going to say, so then we jump into insulin resistance and struggling with our blood sugar control, right?
Yep. And metabolism.
And metabolism. So we start seeing people gaining weight, right? Lack of sleep is definitely linked with metabolic health.
And so they've showed this with medical residents and also nurses who work trick work and work the night shift and things like that.
Yep.
If you, even beyond a couple days of
shifts.
poor sleep, you start developing more insulin resistance. You can basically get pre-diabetic pretty quickly with a poor sleep schedule. And this also for first responders, shift workers, things like that. So this is a huge piece to keep in mind for people that, like you said, could just be stubborn weight loss, but it could also be like, oh, my hemoglobin A1C is showing that I am pre-diabetic or whatever. That sleep piece is not to be discounted.
Right. Yep. It really does set the stage or set the foundation for overall health. So an interesting thing I think people ask me a lot would be what would be recommendations for certain ages, like for sleep, right? Because we know that, say, teenagers probably need a different amount of sleep as somebody who's 45 and maybe somebody who's 2. So do you follow specific recommendations from anybody?
Yeah, so I mean, there's National Sleep Foundation and sleepfoundation.org, good resources.
Yep.
And this is a kind of a consortium of sleep experts that are MDs, psychiatrists, psychologists, other people who've studied sleep. And again, there's some variation, and there is individual variability, but I think the kind of, I don't know, the misconception that, I can get by on like 2 or 3 hours sleep and I'm totally fine, or I'll sleep when I'm dead kind of mentality, that's proven not to be true. Infants, as we know, like if you sort of let them follow their own cycles, they're sleeping 12 to 16 hours a day. Which kind of sounds like a dream sometimes, but and then 1 to 2 year olds that drops to around 11 to 14 hours,
and that's including naps.
Yes.
Right. So bedtime and including multiple naps throughout the day. Yep.
And as we all know, who've had young kids, like if they're in that stage and they miss a nap, there can be hell to pay.
Yes, right.
Things can deteriorate rapidly.
Yeah, they usually don't just add it on to sleep longer at night either.
No. And so it kind of drops a bit as the ages go on. So then you get to like 3 to 5 years old, and then 10 to 13 hours. And again, the need for naps becomes less during that time. And then you kind of hit school age, and it's, somewhere in the range of 9 to 12 hours.
Which I'm going to stop you right there for a quick second, because if you really start thinking about that, so ages 6 to 12, right? So that's kindergarten through like 7th grade-ish. 12 hours a night for some kids.
Yeah.
Some kids need 12 hours. That means they're going to bed at 7 p.m. if they're waking up at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
Which is, this is just a conversation I think people sometimes need to recognize, like 12 hours is a very long time.
Yeah. It's you're not going to bed at 10 or 11 and
getting even 10 hours of
close
sleep
to that recommended. Yep.
Yeah, that means we're needing, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock bedtimes if we're getting up early in the morning.
Yeah, which for school starting times is a necessity.
Yep, for sure.
And then teens, and we'll talk about this in a second, a little bit more detail, but that 13 to 18 years, it's 8 to 10 hours.
Still, that's a huge point to make. It's still 8 to 10 hours. And again, 10 hours, 9 p.m. to 7 a.m.
And then
10 hours.
People who kind of question this, well, look at what's happening to teen mental health, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I think there's a direct correlation.
Yeah.
And then by adulthood, really 7 hours is kind of the minimum. Maybe there's some people that can get by with a little bit less than that, but chronically 7 hours minimum. Up to 9 hours. Again, depending, like an athlete is going to need more. And when you look at some of these professional athletes, they know how important it is, and they will block off 9 hours. Prioritize sleep because they know if not, their performance is affected.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think another thing that's interesting, and again, we'll chat about it, but is the certain hours that people are drawn to sleep, because they change, right? So as we age, we might be more prone to staying up a little bit later, right? So like the teenage years, oftentimes their just natural biorhythm changes.
I used to be a night owl.
Yes, where they want to stay up until 10, 11, but then they can't get up at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
That's the piece that I think is tough. And so it's hard with school,
Yep.
right? Where you have a lot of these like student athletes that to get in their extra classes, they're getting up super early. So it's a tough road, and I don't have the answer for that one, but just making sure that sleep is still a priority, and
don't shortchange it, because it will have repercussions.
Yes, it's huge. I know we still do pretty early bedtimes at my house, and my kids are, high school and junior high. So
yeah, my kids are a little bit younger, but yeah,
Yep.
we try to get in bed at least to do a little reading around 8. Optimally, we'd like to get them lights out 8:30.
Yep.
Sometimes they push it till 9, and then they
Yep.
will get up between 6:30 and 7. So that's still close to 10 hours, 9 to 10 hours.
Yep. Yeah, we still shoot for 9 o'clock bedtimes, and then get up about 6:37.
And they need
on
it.
the day.
They need
Yep.
that. They need
Oh,
that
for
amount.
sure.
And I've seen nights when we've shortchanged it.
Ooh, it's not fair. Yeah. And the other thing is, like you mentioned earlier, we're really noticing that there is a difference in adolescent mental health right now, right? And we're, particularly young females, but it's with boys as well. And, my previous position where I did a lot of work with school-based health centers.
You saw this front lines.
I saw this constantly. And I can tell you without a doubt that sleep plays a role in every kiddo's situation, but sometimes it is exacerbating the situation, right? And so
and can be serious and dangerous.
Huge. We have kiddos that are going to bed, like I said, at midnight, 1 a.m. And sometimes it's just because of a choice. Sometimes it's because of homework, or they get home on the bus at 2:30 in the morning, and then they're supposed to get up and go to school the next day, and it's tough.
Yeah, there's some social things that can definitely involve with that. And there was some recent research, and this was published on the sleepfoundation.org, and I thought it was really interesting. And so, one of their quotes is, "The American teen is not their best slept self." So I think it's kind of a great synopsis statement. But per their studies, 8 out of 10 teens don't get enough sleep. So that's also kind of a wake-up call right there.
Right.
And they sort of scored it, A through F, like
right, like a
getting a passing
report card.
score. Yes.
Yeah.
And so they felt that over half the teens got a D or worse.
I know.
And the typical teen actually gets an F for their kind of healthy sleep behaviors.
Right.
And we're going to talk about sleep hygiene, sleep behaviors in a couple minutes here. But note that that's 8 out of 10. If you have a teenage child, just odds are they are probably getting a failing report card when it comes to their sleep practices and their sleep hygiene.
Yep, for sure.
And this is more than just like lip service, that they are really linking this to the teen mental health crisis, and the fact that 1 in 3 teens have at least mild or more than mild depression. And even the teens will feel that their sleep and their mental health is connected. Right. So, if that's being self-reported in a population that's typically not always the most self-aware population,
right.
I think that really goes to speak that there's something going on there.
Oh, for sure. And I do think they are starting to be, this age group is starting to be a little more cognizant of how they feel based on what they've done, right? So they're starting to pay attention, which is really cool, to how they're eating, how they're sleeping. But again, 3/4 of teens say their emotional well-being is negatively impacted if they sleep less than normal. We have that youth behavioral risk survey that comes out every I think it's every 2 years, and they collect data nationwide on specific age groups, and they talk about sleep, and kids self-report, right, and how well they're doing. And that's how we know too that the rates of depression and suicidality have increased so dramatically in the last really since about 2008.
Yeah, I mean, multifactorial, but you can't discount the role of sleep that could be playing in that. And circling back, one of the other things I think is interesting when we talk about sort of the impact of insufficient sleep and the whole thing with like being a metabolism killer. The other thing is it makes you crave carbs.
Yes.
And they've actually shown this. And if you look at like the nurse's station at most hospitals, and you come in the early in the morning to round or something like that, it's just stacked with like candy and quick carbs and things like that. And they've actually shown this to be true. It kind of changes your brain chemistry. And because of this like sort of disruption in your metabolism, when if you say working all night or whatever, or chronically underslept, you're not craving that salad. You don't want to go out and you're craving something that's not going to be good for you. Or when you're eating late at night like that, you're not eating something that's, you're not eating Brussels sprouts, or, you're typically eating something that's fast food, carby food, quick energy food.
They're craving the comfort, right?
And you roll that into teens who are already kind of leading in that direction. I think it could be a compounding factor.
Oh, for sure. So some of these studies that we've been talking about, they also report that teens who have trouble falling or staying asleep 2 or more nights a week have reported significantly more depressive symptoms. 7 out of 10 teens have to be present for the start of school activities before 8:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I would say it's probably before 8.
And kids who are rural, and obviously we see this in Montana.
The bus rides are 45 minutes long.
Yeah, and they're coming from a fair clip away, and the bus might be picking them up at like 6:30 or 7,
Right.
and so that means they have to be up X amount of time before that. And so it's, again, we don't have any great answers for it, but I think just recognizing that this is having an impact, and then trying to figure some different workarounds, and at the very least, prioritizing an earlier bedtime because of these factors, to try to figure out some solutions.
Right.
Because they also showed that the teens who did get the recommended amount of sleep have significantly lower depressive symptoms.
Right. Yeah. Teenagers who start school before 8:30 in the morning have higher levels of depressive symptoms than those who start school later. And again, this is all from that previous study that we were discussing. It is, it's tough though. Like, how do you get a full day of classes in, and you're in the advanced studies, and you're, doing that, and then you're in a school sport without doing that early hour, that like 7 a.m. class.
Yeah.
It's hard to get in what you need for college.
There's no quick fix answers, but I think just starting that discussion, recognizing that it could be a problem.
Right. Yep, exactly. And if we don't talk about it, who will?
Yep. And so this leads us, and obviously it's not just teens, right?
No.
Sleep disorders, sleep deficiency are epidemic.
Yes, for sure. We often will come in and say, hey, how are you doing today? Well, pretty good. Unless if we don't get enough sleep, it's like, oh, darn it, last night wasn't the best sleep night for me.
Yeah, and I will admit I'm a horrible sleeper, and I battle sleep issues. So, and we'll talk about some of this in my like the cocktail that works for me to try to help with sleep. But
not the cocktail you're all thinking of either.
No, which actually is horrible for your sleep. We'll talk about that. And obviously Huberman has gone at length talking about that, like how disruptive that is to sleep.
Well, and sleep, our ability to fall asleep and stay asleep can change throughout life, right? And so for women, a lot of times we hit perimenopause and then menopause. It really, the progesterone changes really impact sleep.
And having a baby might have a slight impact on your sleep.
Being awake to nurse, being awake to feed baby. Yeah. I mean, there's just multiple times there that we have major issues. Women take a major hit. We deserve more medals.
Yep, absolutely. So that, the 35 to 40% of Americans being reported as underslept by recent surveys. And that's probably not taking into account like women during the childbearing years, which is, that's a whole nother level, of sleep deficiency.
And even defining sleep deficiency, right? Like, are we saying just somebody who sleeps straight for 8 hours, or are we saying somebody who's been woken up 3 times, right, to take the dog out to pee or to feed a baby or whatever, right? Because multiple awakenings can contribute to sleep insufficiency.
Absolutely.
So it's not just, you might get 9 hours, but if you're waking up 4 times, you're still going to feel not rested.
And if you're not hitting those important parts of sleep, which include your REM sleep, which is kind of where you dream and your eyes are darting around, and the deep delta wave sleep, which is where a lot of the repair stuff goes on and your brain takes out the trash. So if you're sort of quote unquote sleeping, but you're more like lightly unconscious but not hitting those important levels, then that doesn't count. And there's getting to be better metrics and ways of wearables and things like that to kind of measure some of these things. But 10 to 15% of people having chronic insomnia, I'll raise my hand and say I've fallen in that camp.
Right.
But there, part of that is recognizing that you have impairments because of that lack of sleep. Like if you're sleeping 6 hours a night, but you are really, truly and honestly not having any impairments, then that may or may not fall in that sort of category. But if you could prove like your metabolism's fine and your mental health is fine and your brain's working fine, all these things like that. But by and large, like it's that minimum 7 hours for adults, and that fact that you are rested enough to not have impairments and be pretty fully functional the following days. I think that sort of speaks to whether or not you're having adequate sleep or whether there's some type of sleep deficiency or sleep disorders.
Right. And it's funny, I always used to ask people, okay, how do you fall asleep? Do you fall asleep pretty easily? Do you stay asleep all night, or do you have multiple awakenings? And then how do you wake up? But I have to say I've kind of changed how I approach the how do you wake up, because I typically sleep quite well. I don't wake up happy very many mornings. So, and I still might get good sleep. So I don't know. I think some of us are just really morning people, and some of us just aren't as perky.
Yeah, versus
Yeah.
even with my, sleep battles or whatever, I wake up early and that's when my brain is the best.
Right.
Like I'm definitely,
Yeah.
I've transitioned into that morning
Yeah.
person kind of thing. So that's when I like to do my reading and writing and,
Yeah.
and thinking.
Maybe if I have a good solid 15 minutes first before anybody talks to me.
Yeah. You got to get up before your kid's up.
Oh,
Because then everything
yeah.
falls apart. When you're
Yes.
scrambling to get them ready for school.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about sleep hygiene, right?
Okay.
Because I
Yep.
think this is where a lot of people get a not
Yeah.
good report card.
Well, and it's also confusing. I think there's a lot of confusing information out there for people. So I think, caffeine is a big one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think probably many people fall on various sides of this caffeine equation. So
Mm-hmm.
some can have caffeine all day long and they can lay down and fall asleep,
The fast metabolizers.
right? Other people, not so much. They might even need to stop at 10 a.m. But typically we say noon to 2. I don't know what you go by, but I usually recommend before 2.
Yeah, around noon is kind of, but again, I think that really depends.
It all depends on, the person.
And
right?
there's a couple of these, what they call polymorphisms, meaning like your
Right.
genetics and your ability to sort of metabolize / detoxify the caffeine
Yep.
And break it down and what the half-life is. Like how long does that caffeine last in your system?
Yep.
And I forget if it's like somewhere between, is it like a quarter to a half of people they estimate are to some degree slow caffeine metabolizers?
I don't
and then
remember the
there's-
statistic.
Yeah, and then there's maybe a quarter to a third that are fast metabolizers.
Right.
And these are the ones, like my parents, they'd be like at a dinner party or something and drink full octane coffee
Yeah.
and go to bed.
Yeah. So I think
That ain't me.
I'm in that group. I don't try to drink caffeine late in the day just because I know it will impact it, but I could have a cup of coffee at 5 p.m. and still go to bed. So,
Good for you.
yeah.
But a lot of people can't. And so that's always something to keep in mind is that,
yeah.
And for teens too. I mean,
Huge.
now, again, the amount of coffee drinks and stuff that are popularized and the energy drinks and things like that with teens.
It's not just coffee. It's the
not-
energy drinks,
yeah.
like you just said.
So I'd say something to keep in mind, trying to
Yep.
avoid that later on caffeine because that could be having an impact.
Right. Also, how about lights?
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about, bright light, outdoor light, red light, blue light. Like there's just so many different light options. And then when do you start turning lights down? When should we have it darker, right? All of these
And
things.
screen time and how does that
and
roll
the type
into it
of
all?
light that comes off a screen. Like all of those things, there's so much information about out right now.
So the blue light is the thing you hear about the most,
Yep.
and that's the light that both you're getting from a lot of the screens, your phone,
yep,
your tablet,
computer.
Yep,
Yep.
computers and TVs. But you also are getting that in that full spectrum light from the sunlight, which is meant to be in the morning.
Yep.
And so setting your what's called your circadian rhythms,
Yep.
your sleep clock. It's funny, the bright light in the morning is as important as like decreasing that light
Yes.
later on at
Yeah.
night. And those sad lights, which we use in Montana a lot because we're not seeing much sun these days, and it gets light at like 9.
Yep.
and then it gets dark at 4.
4:30.
Yeah. So, we're in these dark days, and some people really get and the SAD stands for seasonal affective disorder, which is a real deal.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
we don't have it as bad as Alaska, where in the wintertime you're getting maybe 2 hours of sort of twilighty, daylight. But because of the importance of that bright light in the morning to tell your brain time to wake up, and then it sort of actually starts like a clock in your brain ticking of like how long till you're going to want to go to sleep. So you want that full spectrum with blue light kind of thing in the morning, for at least 5 to 10 minutes. If you can get outside and it's bright and sunny, at least 10 minutes. You don't have to stare into the sun. Obviously, that would be stupid. But like, kind of sun exposure and some of that light hitting your eyes, or these special lights in the morning. But then
Within half an hour of waking.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yep.
that's the current recommendation, which
Yep.
is kind of hard to do occasionally.
I know.
But,
and if you have kids, they're and you're scrambling.
Yeah, yeah.
So what we do is we
But
set
the
it on the
light,
counter, like when we're
yes.
getting the kids lunches and breakfast together. We have that light going.
Yep.
Or if you're up there a few minutes awake before your kids and you're having your morning coffee, pop that light on there.
just turn it on.
Flick it on. And even though you're like, what the heck is this doing? It actually, in your brain, tick, 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 starts that sleep timer so that
Right.
you can actually sleep better at night.
Yep. And it's going to, So those lights also help with that cortisol, melatonin,
Yep.
making sure that melatonin is low in the morning, which is the goal. And we want that to rise throughout the day. But we do want our cortisol up higher in the morning.
Yep.
That's when we want it at the highest. So that light is going to help that too.
And then conversely, how about in the evenings?
Yeah. So in the evenings, I'm sure you've heard of the blue light blocking glasses. They can be helpful. Or just removing the screens if you can for 1 to 2 hours before bedtime.
Absolutely.
Which can be tough.
Especially with a teen,
Especially with a teen. Yep, I'm here to say. Also having a dark room. So there's a lot of research out there now on having a dark room and how even a nightlight can kind of trick the melatonin in our brain from going as high as it needs
and
to.
Some of those little blue lights that are on like your electronics, your charging cords, stuff like that, they're actually crazy strong.
Yep.
And you're looking and you're like, it's bright in this room from these little tiny lights. So some people actually have red tape, like almost like duct tape they'll put over there to try to filter that out, or just cover it up if you can, or just don't have it on.
Right.
Because even those small lights, if they're emitting a lot of that blue light, that can mess with some people's sleep.
Oh, for sure. Yep. One of the other things we talk about is making sure your room is dark, but also cool. So the temperature matters.
Yep.
Right? So it's easier to sleep when it's cooler. And they even say, 68 degrees, 67 degrees.
Oh, yeah. We drop ours to like 64, 65.
There you go. Yeah. But not having it at that like comfortable 70
Yeah.
at night. So it's better if it's cooler.
Because on those hot summer nights, I mean, people don't sleep as well. I'm certainly one of those. And, for the fancy ones, they have, some of these products that are actually like, they sit on your mattress and they're like a cooling device.
Yeah.
And they actually measure your sleep and things like that. I don't use anything like that yet. I'm not that fancy, but I know some people use these and who are really problem sleepers, and they swear by them.
Yeah.
So there are products like that out there on the market that add that sort of extra layer of cooling to try to regulate your body temperature, because that for some people is a game changer for sleep.
Right. Yeah. No, body temperature is huge. Yep.
So I don't know how you deal with it. And again, this is a parental thing or whatever, but like trying to keep the electronics out of the bedroom, especially with teens. I know this is a battle and a hot, controversial subject.
Yeah.
I know some parents who have like they're going on the charging station that's outside of the room somewhere where they're not going to be able to get at them, because it's not only the light, it's also the distraction and the texting and the social media. All those
the
things.
Update. Yeah.
And trying to keep those electronics out of the bedroom, and that includes gaming devices, tablets, phones.
Right.
Which again, I know is going to be a struggle.
Totally.
I don't have teens yet, but it's coming.
Yep, and they are their own little people. So different ideas, like, checking your phone in at night and having it in the kitchen, right? So it's like a central location and maybe everybody puts their phone in the kitchen. We can use it.
We can be guilty about it as well.
Yes. As, adults, we might be the worst, actually. And why would our kids do something that we don't do? Right? So maybe have everybody do that.
But that's good parenting. Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. Going back to using like an alarm clock, right? Instead of, because I hear a lot, but I use my phone as an alarm. And I'm guilty of it too, especially when I travel. Like I use my phone as an alarm. I don't rely on any other devices. But it can matter. And then where in the room is it, right? Is it right next to your bed? Is it right next to your head? Is it across the room, right?
Which brings up the whole EMF thing, which I know is also controversial, and there's some people that don't.
There's a lot of
think
research
there's
going on.
Yeah. But I've read enough research where if you take that what's called the precautionary principle, right? Like it's until you're really sure. First off, do no harm, and there is some evidence that, we're basically walking electrochemical batteries, and our brains are and our bodies are and things like that. And so these EMFs, these electromagnetic fields that come off of things like your devices, especially like your router, your Wi-Fi router, if you have one of those smart meters that for your electricity that go in your house, those are emitting a ton of this RF it's basically electromagnetic fields that they're concerned for their effects on the immune system, effects on sleep, and other things like that. Just like the whole thing with like people who live under power lines, should we be concerned about that? And again, very controversial topic, the 5G towers. That's a big, huge, controversial topic right now.
It'll be interesting to see what comes out in the next 10 years on that, because I'm sure
I
the
think in
research
the next couple of years because
huge.
It's a lot. It should not be like innocent until proven guilty for those type of things that could have serious health impacts. So my thing is always just like, don't have the electronics next to your head. Don't sleep with your head right next to a Wi-Fi router.
Right.
Again, I'm nerdy enough where I have a little meter that you go, it's called a tri-field meter, and you can go and measure the radiation levels at certain areas of your house and how much is coming off your Wi-Fi router and what's that, how far away do you have to be to not be sort of in that field, and make sure if your kid's head's against the wall that there's not something going on there that's kicking off a lot of that EMF, and again, I'm just because I'm a nerd on that, but I'm like, I'd rather be safe than sorry.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
And
and you've done a lot of research on it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you can purchase these things, or we actually will sort of loan these out from our clinic to people if they are wanting to kind of scan their house. But it's one of those things, again, it's not proven, but I think there's enough there to be cautious.
Right. Yeah. So jumping ahead now to like talking about, sleep supplements, right? Or different medications that people have used. And I know, again, this is also like a little bit of a controversial topic too. But there's a lot of information out there and people can look it up. Like all of this, any drug information is available online for anybody to see. So do you have any like easy recommendations as far as like sleep supplements? Wow, that's hard to say fast.
Yeah. So one thing, and again, I've listened to a lot of podcasts and reading Matt Walker's book, the Why We Sleep and things like that.
Great book.
And I believe he also talks about this, but some of these sleep medications, the popular ones that are sort of listed under that, they're called sedative hypnotics.
Yep.
And things like Ambien and Lunesta, which are used a lot. And there are concerns.
Right.
One of it is like, you've probably heard about people sleep driving and sleep eating, and they take them and they do things like their body is awake, but their brain is not. And also they wake up at work and they're like, how did I get here? And they have no recollection, or people would be like gaining all this weight and they couldn't figure out. And then they'd look under their bed and there's all these wrappers.
Right, because they've been eating all night.
Yeah, and they'd have like cameras in the kitchen, and they found that they were just like going in and eating a stick of butter in the middle of the night, and crazy stories like that. That again, I don't know if they've been completely validated, but realistically, I think his big concerns were that you aren't hitting these REM sleep and the delta wave, the actual restorative sleep. Like you're unconscious, but you're not actually sleeping.
Right. So you never do all of the things that your brain needs to do while it sleeps. That's the piece. So you might be lying there motionless.
So use of these things all the time versus occasionally. That there are concerns, and this is something to talk to your healthcare provider about, or look it up from some of the, go on some of the, like the Sleep Foundation website or the book, read the book, and just kind of, if you're using these things all the time, I think it's worthy of a conversation.
Right. And then there's some other ones that I think are pretty, not a bad idea. So like melatonin,
which is the hormone your brain naturally produces when it's time to go to sleep.
Yep. So it naturally raises.
And there may be some other potential side benefits. They wonder if it actually is like helps your immune system, and it may have some anti-cancer properties. And interestingly enough, I was reading some articles about people with GERD, and that taking melatonin actually improved the strength of that valve at the top of their stomach, so their reflux got better, which is kind of a crazy thing I never really thought about.
Yeah. For sure. But then there's also, like chamomile tea, right? So there's like sleepy time tea. There's different things that, we can use with herbs that can
chamomile
really,
and valerian root that
valerian.
affect this neurotransmitter called GABA, that is one of the calming neurotransmitters.
Right.
And
magnesium.
Yeah, exactly. And these things all seem safe, effective. They're non-addicting. I haven't really read of any, kind of major side effect concerns with any of these things. In fact, most people would probably be better off taking a magnesium supplement, to be honest with you.
Right. We're probably all depleted.
Yes,
so we might
exactly. The 5-HTP, which you'll see is actually a precursor for another neurotransmitter, serotonin, which is like your happy, feel good, but that also converts into melatonin, so it may help with calming and the sleep factor, may impact that neurotransmitter called GABA. But people who are on antidepressants like SSRIs, which is the type of antidepressant, have to be really cautious with that, because it may elevate that particular chemical more than you want in the brain with potential side effects. So that would be another one to talk to your provider about.
I was just going to say, any of these I would recommend talking to your own provider about, to make sure that it doesn't contradict something else you're taking. So none of this would be just to go do on your own without having a conversation.
Yeah. And so something I've actually started taking recently that I think helps is something called phosphatidylserine, or sometimes you'll just see it as PS. But it is it's sort of like a naturally derived. It's part of like what your cell membranes and that phospholipid layer of your cell membranes, but it has this action where it blocks cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And so taking it at night when your cortisol should be low, if your cortisol is high, it can apparently help to blunt that response a bit. So for people that have what's called a cortisol reversal, meaning like their cortisol is low in the morning when it should be high, and high in the evening when it should be low, have a lot of messed up sleep, and that this is maybe something that kind of might help with them. So a lot of times I'll kind of do a cocktail of like phosphatidylserine. I take magnesium at night. Sometimes I'll do some teas with valerian and chamomile in there. Melatonin is something I use not infrequently. And I for sure think it helps. For me, I have to kind of create my own cocktail, but again, it's something to discuss with your provider and look at the other things you might be taking. One of the other things I for sure caution against on several fronts, and if you look at almost all the sleep experts, they absolutely recommend against using chronically, are the things like Tylenol PM, which is a combination of acetaminophen and Benadryl. Right.
Yep. So you have the Benadryl piece, which is already possibly problematic the older we get, right? It can change our balance, can change, memory. But then Tylenol can deplete the glutathione,
which is your main
your
main detoxifying chemical in your body.
You kind of need that for your gut. You kind of need that just to function. Yeah. So things that we don't even recognize, right? Because we talk about Benadryl and those impacts, but we don't really talk about the issues with Tylenol.
And Benadryl can make you sleepy, and it has multiple actions. Yeah. But they're starting to potentially link chronic use of these with increased risk of like cognitive decline, maybe Alzheimer's. Right. So again, they're still being researched, but the sleep experts emphatically state these things are not for use chronically. Right. Once in a while, probably not going to be that bad, but
daily for 20 years is probably not a good idea.
Yeah. There's many other options out there.
Right. And then sleep apnea, right? Oh, yeah. Because we all hear about sleep apnea and the risks or the non-risks, that sometimes people will question me of, and and how to get diagnosed and what might be some signs of sleep apnea. And there's different kinds.
It's dangerous. Yeah.
It's very dangerous. Very dangerous.
Under-recognized. Still under-recognized.
I mean, we used to think, we had a model of what we thought it looked like. And now I think it's more recognized readily by healthcare professionals that there is not a one-size-fits-all of sleep apnea.
No, and it's not just people with obesity. That used to be a common misconception. It used to be
like, you had to have a really big neck and you had to be overweight. And now we recognize,
totally not
young
true.
Women that are very thin can have sleep apnea.
Young men,
Young men. It doesn't, it's not a one-size-fits-all.
And so there's sort of two flavors of sleep apnea, and the main one we think of is called obstructive, or OSA, obstructive sleep apnea, which again, originally was just thought to be more related to obesity and having extra tissue around the neck where the airway kind of closes off when you sleep.
Or if your tongue.
Yep, your tongue actually. Back. And with people with some of this weight gain or insulin resistance, actually their tongue grows and starts to take up more space in their mouth. And then when they sleep, that tongue kind of falls back and partially blocks the airway, causing the symptoms of sleep apnea. And these are the people that you think of who are the, they have, or they're super
the
snorers, the big pause, where they're like, are they going to breathe again? Are they going to breathe again?
Yeah.
And then they take a big gasping breath.
Right.
So it's not always that obvious, but sometimes, if there are some of those things.
Sometimes if you just are waking up tired, right?
So chronic headaches. Huge link with that.
But how do people get tested for that?
Well, I'd say the risk of it, they're discovering now from a cardiovascular standpoint, it's as much as like smoking a half a pack a day. And there's a huge link, sort of chicken and the egg, with insulin resistance, type 2 prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and sleep apnea. And I don't know which is the chicken or which is the egg, but it's definitely a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like once you're on that pathway, if you have insulin resistance, you're more likely to have sleep apnea. Once your sleep apnea gets worse, you're much more likely to have insulin resistance for the reasons and type 2 diabetes that we already talked about.
Yeah, progresses.
So breaking that cycle, hugely important. Can be a game changer.
Right.
And really quickly, the central sleep apnea is different. That's more driven by processes in your brain that we're still trying to figure out.
And that one's hard to treat. So definitely be seeing your sleep specialist.
Yeah.
Because the sleep specialist is who's going to diagnose the difference between obstructive sleep apnea and central sleep apnea with a sleep study.
Yep.
So again, definitely, see your pulmonologist, see your sleep specialist if you have questions, but start with your primary care provider.
Yep.
I mean, that's the best person to go to start. Bring up the concerns you have, bring up questions you have.
Yeah.
I know we talked a lot about different wearables that are coming out. We kind of talked about that last week. Some of those I think can be helpful for sleep, right?
Yeah, and I think give you a clue is there or could there be a problem? And I think, but that they're not meant to diagnose sleep apnea. They're meant to give you a clue.
Yep.
And the official was it polysomnography, where you go to a sleep center and they hook you up with a lot of things.
Sleep study, yeah.
And that gives you the most information, but sometimes their waiting list is long or it's far away or there may not be availability. There are home studies. I actually did one of these. And again, I have no financial interest. It was like sleepdoctor.com.
Right.
It's tied in with the Sleep Foundation.
Yeah.
And they send you these basic things, the basic components, not all the bells and whistles, but the basic components for a reasonable screening sleep study to be done in your own home where you're more likely to sleep better anyway.
Right.
And it wasn't super expensive. It may be covered or reimbursable by, if you have HSA, FSA, that kind of thing.
Well, and even some of the, if you want a sleep study now, some of them can still be ordered for at home.
Yeah.
So they have some pretty cool things now.
Yeah, loan out equipment.
Yep. They'll set you up at home. So there's a lot of options again. I know we're getting close on time, so I highly recommend bringing those concerns up to your primary care provider, and that is like a great place to start, and they can help you, go through and figure out what the next best step would be.
Yep.
But typically, if you are diagnosed, there can be, things called a CPAP, right? A big machine that you're going to be wearing with various, either a nose piece or a mouthpiece or something.
Which is funny because people are like, ugh.
But
that's like the reason that they don't want to go there. But
I know.
talking to people who had
they
for
feel
years,
so much better.
Oh my God, they say it is life changing. All of a sudden they get their brain back. They drop 20, 30 pounds.
Right. Weight gain. Yep. Weight gain goes away.
Blood pressure goes down.
Blood pressure goes down.
Yep.
Insulin resistance goes down. Right.
I'm not diabetic anymore.
Metabolic syndrome.
Yep.
Yeah. Decreased.
And there's another thing that I talk about with a dentist friend of mine.
Yes.
They're called MADs, or mandibular advancement devices. So this is not for everybody with sleep apnea, but sometimes if it's more subtle, what it does is it's like basically a mouthpiece or like almost like the little
like a bite blocker.
Yep. And it moves your jaw forward and it pulls your tongue away and it will allow better airflow through in there. And for some people with milder sleep apnea, these things he said for him it was a game changer and he did not have to use the CPAP.
Right.
But that's kind of to be determined by whoever your kind of sleep expert, provider is.
Yeah. Visit with your dentist too.
Yeah. And I'd say the other things we haven't talked about, some of the other non-pharmacologic things to help with sleep overall, besides the other sleep hygiene things we talked about. There's a big rise in what's called CBTI, or cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is basically sort of sleep training your brain how to fall asleep.
Right.
Huge and can be very effective for people.
Right.
And I use there's a bunch of sleep meditation, sleep hypnosis apps and podcasts out there.
Right, that you can just turn on.
Because I can't shut my brain off. That's one of my things. I get to bed at night and then all of a sudden my brain goes crazy.
Yeah.
But if I have one of these other things for my brain to kind of latch onto that brings you down and kind of chills you out and maybe it's telling some sleepy story about the seaside or whatever, for me, it works.
Right. We all have our thing.
Some of them are pay, some of them are for free, but these are all things to try out if you have problem sleepers there's no side effects. They're,
Sleep meditations are awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think that that solidifies this third podcast, but our second pillar.
Yep. Pillar number 2.
Check. Sleep. Yes. Check. So thank you all for listening to the Aware Families podcast today. You can find us at functionalmedassociates.com, where you can also sign up for our newsletter to get more information directly to your inbox, and see us on social media. We have Instagram and Facebook.
And share these episodes with friends that you think could benefit from them. You can always drop us a line on our website too if you have ideas for future podcasts or any feedback. And we appreciate everybody listening, and join us at our next episode, which will be pillar number 3, exercise and physical activity.
Right. Awesome. Until then, do your best to stay aware and make good choices.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.